In the winter of 1961, a Soviet diesel submarine, S-80, mysteriously disappeared in the Barents Sea. Extensive searches yielded no results, and it wasn't until 8 years later that the submarine was discovered on the seabed and raised to the surface to determine the circumstances of its enigmatic demise. We will share the story of S-80 in this program. Today, anyone can experience what it's like to be the commander of a submarine by downloading the free game World of Warships. I, for one, enjoyed playing on a British submarine, the Thrasher, which was known for its substantial size and its 11 torpedo tubes, with 8 of them located in the bow. The designers from the mysterious Albion even increased Thrasher's dive depth to ensure it could evade damage from deep-sea bombs. This is why a division of such submarines formed the backbone of the British fleet during World War II. You can also explore hundreds of other ships in the game, all meticulously recreated with their unique equipment that you can customize. Moreover, the game offers a victory fleet where you can earn containers and commemorative tokens by completing tasks. These tokens can be exchanged for updated Soviet cruisers. So, register in the World of Warships now, and if you haven't played in the game for more than 60 days, generous bonuses await you. The 1950s were the height of the Cold War, a period of intense rivalry between the USSR and the USA. These superpowers vied for influence worldwide, and weaponry played a pivotal role in this struggle. The Soviet Union focused on its submarine fleet and invested heavily in its development. It was during the 1950s that production of the 613 Project diesel-electric submarines, the most numerous in the USSR's history, was established. A total of 215 submarines were built based on the 613 project. They were considered slow but stealthy and reliable. Their primary missions included destroying enemy warships and transports, laying mines, conducting reconnaissance, and testing new weapons. S-80 joined the fleet in 1951 and became the first submarine of the 613 project. Initially armed only with torpedoes, it was modernized to accommodate 2 horizontal missile launchers with P-5 cruise missiles by the mid-1960s. Essentially, S-80 was transformed into a testing platform for new naval weaponry. Among its other features, the submarine was relatively small by modern standards, measuring only 76 meters in length. It had a robust hull divided into 7 compartments, and its maximum diving depth was about 200 meters. However, it had limitations, particularly regarding the time it could spend underwater, which depended on the energy reserve in its batteries. Periodically, it needed to resurface to recharge the batteries, which required turning on its diesel engines. The diesel engines couldn't function underwater since they needed air. To make the battery charging process less conspicuous, designers equipped the 613 Project submarines with a device known as a snorkel, Russian abbreviation RDP. The snorkel was a tube that could be raised above the surface while the submarine remained submerged. This allowed the diesel engines to receive the necessary air, the batteries to recharge, and the submarine to maintain its submerged status. Thanks to the RDP, the diesel engines could provide the required air for the batteries, and the submarine could remain underwater. On January 25, 1961, S-80 left the Northern Fleet Base and sailed to the Barents Sea for training and exercises, including the training of young sailors. It had a crew of 68 on board. On the night of January 27th, the commander, Anatoly Sityarchik, reported that all the tasks had been completed and received permission to return to the base. After that, communication with the submarine was lost, and it vanished without a trace. The search for the missing submarine commenced with the involvement of search and rescue vessels, military ships, and aircraft, but no signs of an accident could be found. However, a week later, on one of the fishing vessels, they found a damaged stainless steel plate retrieved from the sea, and on it were the markings S-80. Unfortunately, the fishermen couldn't provide specific details about where and when they had retrieved this plate. 7 months after S-80's disappearance, complaints from fishermen started to reach the military. They reported losing their nets as they snagged on some underwater object. The investigation of the seabed in the same area of the Barents Sea revealed that the nets were getting tangled with the sunken submarine. 7 years after the loss of S-80, it was found on the seabed at a depth of 196 meters. It was resting on solid ground with a 35-degree list to the starboard. There were no visible signs of damage to the hull. It took 10 dives of an observation camera to make preliminary conclusions about the submarine's loss. According to 2 emergency buoys released by the crew, it was clear that the submariners had survived for some time in the bow and stern compartments. Special attention was given to the rudders. The horizontal rudders were stuck in the rise position, while the vertical rudder was turned to the left. The upper conning tower hatch was open, and the periscope was lowered. However, the radio communication antenna and the RDP snorkel device were raised, indicating that the emergency situation began at the surface level. The government decided to raise the submarine to establish the cause of the flooding of the S-80. This was crucial to verify the structural safety of the remaining submarines of the 613 project. The operation to lift the submarine started in the summer of 1969 and involved the use of the new deep-water vessel, Carpathy. Deep-sea operations were conducted using a specialized working chamber because divers couldn't work at that depth. First, they raised the bow and stern sections of the submarine using cables, then towed it to a shallower depth where divers began a submergence under the hull. It was found that several compartments were filled with water, but the torpedoes were in a safe condition. The efforts to drain the compartments posed a risk of the torpedoes exploding. Initially, there were thoughts of abandoning the investigation and sinking the submarine. However, the problem was solved by an unknown mine officer. He, wearing a diver's outfit, personally entered the first compartment and brought the torpedoes to a safe state. Everything was ready for the drying process to begin and to establish the cause of the S-80's loss. According to the findings of the State Commission, the catastrophe unfolded quickly. On the night of January 27, 1961, the submarine was sailing at periscope depth with the RDP system in operation, meaning the diesel engines were running. The weather was harsh, with stormy seas. At some point, a wave swept over the RDP snorkel head that fed air to the submarine. In the event of an emergency, a float valve was designed to close the intake. However, on that night, the valve remained open, and a great volume of water poured into the fifth compartment via the 450mm RDP trunk. The force of the incoming water made it impossible for the submariners to close the trunk. Despite the efforts of a crew member from another submarine who attempted to shut the trunk, it wasn't successful either due to a lack of visibility or an incorrect turning of the handles. All efforts to close the water intake in the fifth compartment. Attempts to find any traces of the accident using military ships, aircraft, and helicopters were unsuccessful. However, after a week, on one of the fishing vessels, an emergency buoy was discovered in the retrieved trawl with a stainless steel plate. When they examined the markings on it, they found S-80. Unfortunately, the fishermen couldn't provide precise details about where and when they had snagged this buoy. A 7-month search for the missing submarine, involving dozens of pieces of equipment and technology, yielded no results. Gradually, the intensity of the search diminished, and over the years, naval sailors began receiving complaints from fishermen who were losing their nets, entangling them with some underwater object in the same area of the Barents Sea. An inspection of the seabed revealed that the nets were getting caught on the sunken submarine. 7 years after the disappearance of the S-80, it was discovered at a depth of 196 meters. The submarine lay on solid ground with a 35-degree starboard list. There were no visible hull damages, and 10 dives of an observation camera were needed to make preliminary conclusions about the submarine's demise. Based on the evidence from 2 emergency buoys released by the crew, it was apparent that the submariners had survived for some time in the bow and stern compartments. Special attention was given to the rudders, with the horizontal rudders frozen in the rise position while the vertical rudder was shifted to the left. The upper conning tower hatch was open, and the periscope was lowered. However, the radio communication antenna and the radar equipment, as well as the snorkel device, were raised, indicating that the emergency situation had begun at the surface level. At the government level, a decision was made to raise the submarine to determine the cause of the flooding of the S-80, with the aim of ensuring the structural safety of the remaining 613 project submarines. The operation to lift the submarine began in the summer of 1969, with the participation of the new deep-sea vessel, Carpathy. Deep-sea operations were conducted using a specialized working chamber because the work of divers was impossible at that depth. Initially, they used cables to lift the bow and stern sections of the submarine and then towed it to shallower depths, where divers were able to access the hull. It was discovered that several compartments were filled with water, but the torpedoes were in a safe condition. Draining the compartments posed a risk of the torpedoes exploding. There were even considerations to abandon the investigation and sink the submarine, as the situation was becoming increasingly hazardous. However, the problem was eventually solved by an unknown miner, a second-ranking captain, who, with personal initiative and with the permission of the expedition leaders, entered the first compartment in divers' gear and secured the torpedoes in a safe state. With the torpedoes secured, everything was ready for the compartments to be drained and the cause of the submarine's demise to be determined. According to the findings of the State Commission, the catastrophe unfolded rapidly. On the night of January 27, 1961, the submarine was traveling at periscope depth with the RDP system, snorkel, in operation, meaning the diesel engines were running. The weather was extremely cold, and the sea was experiencing some storms. At a certain point, a wave engulfed the snorkel head of the RDP system, which supplied air to the submarine. In case of an emergency, a float valve was designed to close the intake. However, on that night, the valve remained open, and a substantial volume of water poured into the fifth compartment through the 450mm RDP trunk. The force of the incoming water prevented the submariners from closing the trunk effectively. Despite efforts to close the water intake in the fifth compartment, they were unsuccessful due to the strong water pressure. After the diesel engines were stopped, the submarine lost propulsion and remained motionless. Subsequently, it started to sink to the depths. At an angle of 45 degrees with the stern down, and with a delayed ballast tank below, they couldn't prevent too much water from entering the robust hull of the submarine. The boat grounded at a depth of around 200 meters. According to specialists' calculations, all of this occurred within a minute. The hull withstood the impact of hitting the seabed, but water continued to rush inside through the RDP trunk. Nobody could do anything about it, as the sea crushed everything in its path, literally tearing bulkheads between compartments to pieces. In a matter of minutes, water filled all compartments from the second to the sixth, resulting in the loss of 44 lives. Those who survived the longest were the submariners who managed to seal themselves inside the first and seventh compartments, a total of 24 people. They released emergency buoys and replenished the air in the torpedo tubes to breathe. Calculations indicated that the 14 sailors in the seventh compartment could have survived for about 6 hours. However, at some point, the water breached the bulkhead, leading to their drowning. Consequently, the last survivors were the 10 sailors in the first compartment, and estimates suggest they could have survived from 1 day to a week. It is terrifying to even imagine the psychological torment they endured, knowing they were in a hopeless situation with no chance of rescue. After the S-80 was raised and dried, specialists had the arduous task of entering the submarine to establish the causes of its demise. This was especially challenging for the person who was the first to inspect the compartments. Vice Admiral Reserve Rostislav Filinovic, a representative of shipbuilding, described the scene he encountered when he entered the submarine through the emergency hatch in the seventh compartment. The submariners' bodies were found in the solarium, which had been squeezed inside the hull from the fuel tanks. In the first, second, third, and seventh compartments, there were inflatable cushions. The bodies of all the sailors struck him with their remarkable preservation, and many of them could be recognized by their faces, thanks to the steel that saved them from instant death. However, some had died of asphyxiation. In the second compartment, one sailor was found, gripping the rail along which an electrical current had passed from his feet. Another sailor had tied a noose around his neck while lying in his bunk, and others endured until the end. Specialists reached a consensus that when the S-80 grounded and its crew was doomed to surface, the submarine could no longer emerge independently. Submariners didn't attempt to ascend using their individual breathing apparatuses because they were too deep and couldn't rely on rescue help, as there were no means to call for assistance. They couldn't reach the surface from that depth. The recovered last moments of the S-80's crew indicated that during the emergency, the captain was not in the central post, and he was discovered in the middle corridor of the second compartment, suggesting that he had descended from the bridge. The remaining crew members in the central post were the executive officer and the officer on duty. The chief mechanic had gone to the sixth compartment. These factors might have contributed to the delayed decision-making. Disagreements also arose regarding the sudden dive of the submarine. Alongside the version of the helmsman's error in failing to maintain the rudders in the rise position at periscope depth, there were other theories. Some experts suggested that the S-80 had to quickly evade a collision with another vessel, possibly a foreign spy vessel. This was suggested by the vertical rudder deflected 20 degrees to the left. Other experts pointed to the possibility of ice formation obstructing the RDP snorkel valve, indicating a factory assembly issue where the rubber seal no longer provided an airtight closure. These questions have remained unanswered to this day. The crew members of the S-80 submarine were buried in a mass grave in the village of Olenia Guba in the Murmansk region. A monument was erected at their grave, and the S-80 submarine itself was recognized as unsalvageable. The S-80's fate was kept classified, and it was destroyed along with its torpedoes by an explosion as part of the repair work. The twisted remains were later dismantled for their metal. After the investigation into the causes of the disaster, the command ordered the development and implementation of new systems to detect water ingress on Soviet submarines. The ballast tank blow system was modernized, controls were changed, and adjustments were made to submarine design. The circumstances of the S-80's loss were communicated to the entire personnel of the Soviet submarine fleet. The instructions on submarine survivability incorporated special recommendations based on the investigation results. In this way, the Navy taught the lessons of the tragedy and took measures to ensure such an incident would never happen again. Thank you, friends, for listening to me. Please like and subscribe for future encounters.
Enemy cruiser destroyed. Torpedoes to starboard. We're well below the waterline. We're flooding quickly. Problem solved, sir. Torpedoes to starboard. Pull below the waterline. We're flooding quickly.
We've destroyed an enemy cruiser.
Problem solved, sir. Problem solved, sir.
The enemy is about to win. Battle ends in 5 minutes. Our victory is in sight.